Welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals. In this video, we're going to talk about one rule for marriage, communication, and ego work. Just one rule for marriage, communication, and ego work. Now, we did a video previously called Marriage, Communication, and the Implicit. And it's important before you watch this video, during this video, we're going to presume that you have also seen that video because we're going to build on some of the concepts. So in this video, this one rule, the one rule isn't the end point, like you follow this rule and you're done. It's really the difficulty in following this rule that prompts a process that can help you improve a lot of things in your relationship and with yourself. And that's what we're going to look at today. So what problem are we solving here? Our struggles to interact with the people closest to us are closely connected to our sense of identity, or what is often called the ego. Detaching from your egoic identity is like taking out 50 birds with one stone. Instead of just taking out 2 birds with one stone, we can really solve a whole lot of problems in life if we can get this one issue down. And since life is a series of interactions, it is in the heat of those interactions that a lot of ego detachment lines of effort can be identified. So we can identify what lines of effort should and could we be working on during this. So we can identify a lot of egoic lines of effort that we can be working on while we are interacting with the people that are closest to us. Okay. So some of the benefits, I got about 7 benefits listed here, and there are a lot more than this, but if you implement what we're talking about in this video, you're going to be able to relate better. You're going to be able to know yourself better. You're going to be able to be actively engaged in your own growth. You're going to be more authentic. You're going to have increased interactive fluency, increased emotional intelligence, and an increased capacity to cultivate meaning in a relationship. So those are some of the benefits that we're going to get from today's session if we implement the practices that come along with these, okay? Committed couples should be in the process of partnering to make both of themselves and their partner better. Like the Tim McGraw and Faith Hill song, Better Than I Am, More Than I Was. That should be happening in a marriage relationship. It's one of the benefits of marrying a person who both loves you and will contend with you because they tend to help make you better. Ego and identity work is a key ingredient in growth and transformation. Couple that with the fact that discussions with one's committed spouse or partner can be an excellent medium to learn about your own ego and field test your progress, because that's probably where it's going to be tested the most. So we're going to combine these two things of ego work and communication with the partner because they go hand in hand. The more you are better at one, the more you will be making progress in the other, either way you look at it. So this relatively short video is going to pull from multiple concepts that have been covered in other videos on this channel, mainly in the Growth and Transformation series, but don't worry, I will point out these concepts as we go so you don't get lost if you're new here or new to this channel. It's difficult delivering, so this channel has a lot of I used to have a fundamentalist Christian background, and I've come out of that as I have grown and transformed. And so a lot of the audience of this channel has also come from that background, and that brings a difficulty to us, kind of like the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's difficult delivering content to an audience that largely considers itself to have a certain degree of expertise in the domain being covered, which is where I was before I started to wake up and when I made a whole bunch of very stupid decisions, a lot of those being very relationship decisions, okay? I thought I had all the right doctrine, had all the right Christianity, I knew all the things when I was making all the wrong decisions, and my fundamentalist Christianity was the biggest sin of my life. Okay, it's caused the most destruction ever, and that's not what you think it would do, but it did. So in reality, a lot of what we've learned from culture, school, and church just isn't so, and our sense of intuition needs to be recalibrated to reality by first-hand experience. People impulsively issue moralistic judgments against content that does not align with their church beliefs, and this only harms and stultifies them further. We encounter that a lot on this channel. So before listening to this video, set the intention to have beginner's mind and epistemic humility. So here's the one rule. We have one rule. What is the one rule? Now remember, this is not the end point. This is the beginning of a process of work that you are going to do. But that one rule is this: never respond in a tone of anger or frustration. I'm going to say that again. Never respond in a tone of anger or frustration. This is not the end state for the sake of itself. Once you accomplish this rule after being prompted, doesn't mean that's the end. This is supposed to inform you to do something else, okay? It is the first step to a process. The process starts when you realize that you want to break the rule, but then do not. I want to raise my voice in anger and frustration. And maybe you do, maybe you don't. So maybe if you do, you can go back in hindsight and see, what was this about? And if you don't, you can also ask the question, what was this about? Whenever you have this moment where you want to raise your voice in anger or frustration, you now have choices and opportunities to excel that branch out from this realization. Now you are getting a signal from your body that there's something about yourself that you need to work on when you want to respond in anger and frustration. Well, you want to watch yourself from the outside as if you are somebody watching a third party that isn't even you. We're going to try some of that. Now, it's very important that you never ever weaponize this process. And what do you mean by that? If your partner breaks the rule, say they raise their voice in anger and frustration. By the way, this kind of thing works best if both partners are committed to self-growth, self-improvement, and transformation. That's what works best. Oftentimes, in the middle of a conversation, I can stop the conversation and I can tell Paula, my ego just took a sting from the word choice you just used. And so now we're both looking at it like we're looking under the hood of a car at something that's wrong with a car that's not necessarily part of me or my identity. We can both examine the process in a dispassionate way where we don't get tempers flaring, where we can examine what's happening and then move together to resolve the issue. So first of all, both parties. So what I'm trying to say is that Paula and I speak the same growth and transformation language, so that when something comes up, I can kind of sidestep, if you will, whatever it is we're talking about and talk about this process of how I'm hearing what's being said, and she understands exactly what I'm doing, which is very helpful because this could be confusing if somebody doesn't understand what you're doing. But never weaponize this process. If your partner breaks the rule, they yell at you or get frustrated, it's not your job to hold them accountable and say, you broke the rule, you shouldn't have yelled and you did. That's not what we're doing with this, okay? It is actually an opportunity for you to double down on your own internal work. How does this now trigger you, and what signals are being sent from your body that tell you what you can work on? So your partner's work is not something that you can do, okay? If you're both committed to this, they will figure it out. They will not need to be told, so do not weaponize this against them. This is not a tit for tat. One of the problems, I've been a pastor for many years. I've been a company commander, dealt with a lot of couples there too, and also now dealing in the psychological realm. What people tend to do when they start to learn something new, like say it's the Bible, they will learn a few things that should be happening in accordance with Scripture, and then they will use those verses and beat their spouse over the head with the Bible, okay? Or when they start learning about psychological concepts, they will start beating their spouse over the head with those. They will weaponize everything. You're a narcissist. I have boundaries, all this kind of stuff, okay? So you don't want to fall into that trap of weaponizing anything we're going to say here to use as fuel and ammunition to win the next argument against your spouse, because that's just going to defeat the entire purpose. This is only for you, but it works best if the other person is also trying to do something for themselves along the way as well. So if they do break the rule and raise their voice in anger or frustration, it's actually an opportunity for you to double down on your own internal work. Each partner needs to know that their partner is for them no matter what. So it needs to be an emotionally and psychologically safe place to be able to say what needs to be said without having it held against them later, okay? So the process is, first thing, be very aware of your tone and never respond or engage with a tone of frustration or anger. Remember, that's rule number 1. Then the next thing is when you are prompted to respond to any stimulus, because sometimes you're not responding to words or phrases in a conversation. You might be responding to a situation. Maybe you saw something that puts your trust for your spouse in question, or you saw the Macy's card bill or something like that, okay? Whenever you want to respond to something, whether it's in conversation or a situation, circumstantial, otherwise, take somatic inventory first. Now, we do this on FSI. On our Wednesday night sessions, we meet and we'll have somebody offer up a proposition. And before people can respond to the content of the proposition, they first have to respond somatic awareness. What emotion do I feel, or emotions do I feel in response to this? And where do I feel it in my body? I'm going to say that first. And sometimes if I'm talking to Paula, even in the middle of a conversation, we might be talking about the kids, or the pool needs to be repaired, or how much something cost. And then we'll pause and be like, well, what you just said makes me feel a little curious. And I feel it kind of in the back of my neck and around the middle of my chest. And so you first note how it feels, and then pause, and then you can start moving into some kind of response. So you want to, this is a practice to get you used to the signals that your body is trying to send you, okay? Another way to say this is that all of your subconscious is in your body, or your body is your subconscious, something like this. So we have to learn to listen to it. And doing it very intentionally and pausing to do it on purpose can be very, very helpful. And we practice that in our FSI sessions, and we recommend that couples practice it when they're having discussions with each other. Actually pause the conversation and talk about how something made you feel. And that brings up the emotion wheel. On our webpage, beyondthefundamentals.com, on the glossary, under E, we have an emotion wheel there. You can also just Google emotion wheel. Sometimes you might not be clear what you're feeling. So having an emotion wheel, it just looks like a big wagon wheel, and it's a bunch of emotional categories arranged topically and in a circular format. And it helps you, I guess I can just stick one on the screen here, right? And it helps you look to see what kind of emotion matches how you're feeling. Because we often very much, especially when we're starting new with this, we need that as kind of a crutch to help us figure out what this thing is. All right, so that can help us with our somatic awareness. So we're going to take somatic inventory. So what might this look like? You have some kind of prompt or a trigger. It's somebody says something, somebody does something that makes you want to respond, and maybe you're frustrated or angry. So anytime you want to respond with a tone of annoyance, frustration, or anger or argumentation, you're going to respond. Now you might be initiating conversation in an angry. You might be initiating the conversation because maybe you're responding to the credit card bill. Okay. Who charged this? You never know what it is. But it's usually a response to something. So when I say respond, it might not just be in conversation. It might be to other stimuli as well, whether it's an action, situation, or condition. And then you're going to mind your emotional dysregulation. Okay. Anytime you're emotional dysregulated is when your emotions take over and they start driving how you act, respond, and talk. Your blood pressure gets elevated. You might start to sweat, okay? Your breathing gets heavier, you have emotional, and then you start maybe yelling, or maybe you start crying, something like that, okay? Or to state this negatively, anytime you are prompted to respond in a way that is not kind, warm, or receptive, okay? So anytime you're prompted to respond to something that isn't kind, warm, or receptive, that's your moment to pause and take somatic inventory. How am I feeling? What's going on? And then we're going to identify what needs to be worked on. What am I attached to that I need to let go of, that I'm pulling in as part of my identity and who I am that really isn't? So we're going to stop, take somatic inventory. This is your prompt to examine something about yourself. Your impulse to be angry is a signal from your body to your mind that there is something about you that needs to be adjusted. So this brings up the issue of equanimity, and we don't want equanimity to be fake. We want it to be an actual real state of mind that you can maintain internally and externally when prompted with disturbing information, okay? Equanimity is a state of mental stability and composure that is not affected by emotions, pain, or other things that can cause others to lose their balance. It is characterized by an evenness of mind, especially when under stress. Equanimity is a virtue and a value that is promoted by many ancient philosophies and major religions. In our previous video on marriage communication and the implicit, we just used the example of the word marriage, and we showed many things just associated with the word marriage that we might have implicitly as the idea associated with marriage, that's what marriage means to us, but we aren't even aware. And so you're thinking marriage, you're thinking I'm with this person, we have a house together, and then something comes up and you find out that you're not going to have any vacation next year. And then you suddenly realize, you never know what you're associating with marriage. So I have a list here of different things that people are thinking of. And in the previous video that this one is related to, we went and read all of these off, and I'm not going to do that now. So when you're so what we talked about was finding all of these things in the implicit. They're implicit. They're embedded into the person's concept of marriage. We're going to find all these things. We're going to make them explicit. What does marriage mean to you with regard to family mealtime? With having couples friends, with doing hobbies? Should we have some together, some separate? How much are they allowed to cost? What about how many vehicles we should have? We could go through this whole list. And come to find out, some people are attached to very different things, okay? You might have one partner is attached to, say, these things, and I think I have about 6 of them pointed at here, whereas the other partner doesn't really care about those things so much. They're fixated on other things, and that's what they're attached to when they think of themselves as a married person, when they identify as a married person to themselves and to others. These 6 might not matter at all, but like 12 other ones might. And we don't know what they are because we just have one word, marriage. And it means so many different things to different people. So, and that's just one word. That's just one word. And we have all these things attached to it, and we have emotional attachments to these things being done a certain way. And we don't even know that we have these emotional attachments usually until something does not go that way. And then we get upset or angry. And that's when we learn what we are emotionally attached to. So what we want to do is we want to move things over from the implicit over to the explicit. Okay? From the implicit over to the explicit. And then from there, now we've stated it. Now we know that I am egoically attached to seeing my wife as territory, or to having her obsessed with me. There's a couple of examples that are up there. Those are real things, by the way, that people are egoically attached to. Now that I moved it into the explicit, I know that I'm obsessed with this. Now I can work on emotionally detaching from that, and that will take a process that we'll talk about in a few minutes. Notice down here I have these concepts of egoic self and authentic self, but really the authentic self is usually perception-wise kind of embedded inside the egoic self. And when I say ego, I'm not talking about conceit or arrogance, like, oh, he's egotistical. I'm not saying egotistical when I say ego. I'm simply talking about your sense of self, how you think of yourself, and like, how would you describe yourself if you write a bio of yourself? And then also your perception of how you think others perceive of you. This is kind of your ego, okay? And our ego is made up of emotional attachments to things that actually are not ourself. And when you strip all those away and you become emotionally detached from them, what should remain ideally is what we call the authentic self. Now, the authentic self is not like, it's not, I used to listen to heavy metal, but I started dating this guy and he was all into rap. So I left my heavy metal behind and started listening to rap. But then when we broke up, I got to be my authentic self again, start listening to heavy metal again and be my true self. That's not what we're talking about, because the heavy metal in that case or the rap are just 2 different egoic attachments. We're not talking about that kind of be your authentic self. It's not what we're talking about at all. Different things entirely. So your emotional attachment identity. So what you're going to see is the egoic self down here at the bottom. The authentic self is buried underneath there and cannot be seen at all. It's not perceptible at all. It's completely invisible. When a person's around 25 or so, they are 100% ego, and there is no authentic self visible at all. Okay? And it's not exactly a flaw that this is the case. It's kind of like a caterpillar needing to build a cocoon. It's a natural part of the process. It kind of has to happen. Now, once your brain is fully developed around age 25 or so, hopefully you have a wake-up experience soon. You can start to work on doing something about this ego so that your authentic self can interact with the real world. Your emotional attachment identity, or your egoic self, is like a shell of visibility and perception that mediates between you and the outside world. This would be everything that is not the self. As we emotionally detach more and more from the things we identify with by default, but are not actually part of the self, the authentic self becomes more perceptible and interactive. The interactive medium of the ego can never fully go away. In other words, when you interact with people, just anything from going to the grocery store and buying eggs to having personal time with your spouse, okay? You have to interact in ego. But is your ego, okay? Otherwise, we would have no means of interacting or mediating the exchange of meaning with other people. However, with awareness and practice, it can become very transparent and flexible. So this diagram here shows a progress of somebody's very gradually over time, their egoic self. It can't fully go away, but it basically becomes more transparent so that the authentic self is shining through now. Beloved, now are we waiting for the manifestation of the sons of God, Romans 8:19 says. And this is what's happening there, is that you are one thing on the inside, but it's all covered up in these egoic attachments, and we want it to start coming through, the real thing to start coming through. All right? So what we're going to do is we're going to identify the emotional identity attachment. So down here I have the egoic self. And then through behavior somatic awareness, we're going to help discover implicit attachments. We're going to discover them. We have a bunch of implicit attachments. We identify with, probably hundreds, maybe thousands of things. And then once we identify them, we are going to move those from the implicit over to the explicit. So we're going to list these things and we're going to name them. Oh, I am attached to being a good barbecuer. I am attached to being the guy that always runs the crawfish boil. I am attached to being the champion quarterback. Whatever it is you're attached to. You're going to bring them into the explicit. Now, once you have them listed here, you're never going to have them all listed, but you need, 1, 2, or 3 will be enough. For the process that I recommend for this, which comes from Caroline Leaf, the process that I recommend without your life falling apart, I think you can do up to 3 things at a time, okay? And it takes 63 days for one process to complete. So after you take 63 days for 3 of them, you can then do 3 more. And you're like, that takes so much time. Yes, it takes time, so why not start now? Because the time is going to pass anyway. Just think about how fast 2024 just went away. Imagine how many 63-day processes you could have crammed in there for 3 things apiece. Do the math on that, okay? So you could have shed much of your egoic identity meaningfully during this year that just flew by. So invest the time. Take the time, do the thing, invest the time, do the work. So now we're going to go through a process to break the emotional attachment. And what is that process? For each of these, I recommend a 5-step process recommended by Dr. Caroline Leaf, who shows how neuroplasticity can be basically engineered or manufactured. Okay? You would take each one of these things and you would follow daily the 5-step process of what to do about this thing that you're egoically attached to, and change your neuroplasticity about it so that it's no longer an automatic way to see yourself. And going through the process, the 5 steps every day for 63 days can actually rewire your brain. And so ultimately you have the power through what we have learned through cognitive science to rewire your brain to think the thoughts that you want it to think, rather than the ones that you have been programmed to think by our culture, society, church, school, parents, and all those things. Okay? So I highly recommend, I'm not going to delve into that work here. We'll probably save that for another video, but we've mentioned her work a lot. The book is called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. Read that book, go through that process for each of your egoic identity attachments so that you no longer think of yourself in that way. And when you go through that, the process to break the emotional attachments, this egoic self over here, which is opaque and covers up the authentic self, gradually turns more flexible, okay, and more transparent. And that's what we want to see happen. Okay. So your ego, we've talked about before in previous videos how you can be egoically attached to various different things, like your job or a car, or I could probably bring my pen up here, like your job or the kind of car you drive, or maybe your religious action or beliefs or affiliation or things like that, maybe your political affiliation, maybe your skill with music, maybe the kind of house you live in. Who would you be without, the house you have? I think about that. I love the house that I'm in. I would not like it to go away. And maybe I'm egoically attached to it. Okay, maybe a sports team, maybe the fact that you're a good cook, maybe the load that you're bearing, maybe your friends, maybe what other people think of you, how they would rate you. Maybe you're just obsessed with that. Maybe your music genre preferences, maybe your family, maybe your patriotism for whatever country you're from. I have a spider in the middle because it's kind of like a spider web. And imagine a spider that never touches the ground, but can only sense the ground through other things that touch the ground. Like she builds her web. Maybe it's connected to the mailbox or a fence post or the railing on the front of the house or a set of stairs, a banister, something like that, but never directly connected to the ground. And your only sense of being connected to the ground is the degree to which the web connects to the mailbox, which connects to the fence post, which connects to the ground. Okay? So in this analogy, the ground represents the ground of being, and we're constantly having the real ground of being mediated for us by all these other things in our life. And ultimately what we really want to do is get to the ground level of things. Maybe crawl on the ground, build a web that touches the ground, something like that. And you could represent, I put a man in there on a future one like that. So still having these things in your life, but being emotionally detached from them is one of the places you want to get, and you'll be less triggered, less frustrated, less angry, and more able to relate. Okay. I want to talk about feminine and masculine energy and forms of communication. Okay. Now, feminine, these are not limited to gender, because feminine energy can come from a man just as much as it can come from a woman. Okay. And as you get older, men tend to have more increased amounts of feminine energy, and women tend to have increased amounts of masculine energy as we get older, to where we kind of even out as we get older. And then there are some people who, even though their gender is male, they have a lot of feminine energy. This isn't right or wrong. It's just something to bear in mind. We're not casting judgment on this. We're not saying it's right or wrong. But feminine energy impulsively wants to be matched in an emotional state. If a woman's partner, or if any feminine energy from either partner is not matched with an equal amount of emotion in the response, it can feel like the partner doesn't really care or doesn't really get it. They don't really get the issue. This does not mean that a partner should strive to satisfy this impulse. Oh, well, she's angry, I better get angry too. We don't want that. But awareness is a key factor. So the set method can be used, I'm going to tell you what that is, to scratch the itch for emotional matching without sacrificing equanimity. Now, the set method comes from the book I Hate You, Don't Leave Me. I forget the author off the top of my head. Very good book, though. And in chapter 5, they talk about how to talk to people with borderline personality disorder. I am not insinuating that people who who want their emotional state matched have borderline personality disorder at all. I'm not saying that. I'm not insinuating that. But what I am saying is that when somebody wants their emotional state matched, the set method is still good for people to use in everyday life with everyday healthy people. It can still help us communicate and get our points across. So what if we are dealing with a person like this? The process goes like this. You're going to issue a support statement, a statement of concern. I can only imagine what you are going through. And then and it's more than just a statement. It could be a paragraph. It could be a few moments of a conversation, because you need to make sure that they embody and fully integrate your support into how they are thinking before you move on to the next step. If they don't integrate it, we're going to have problems, and that's what the right-hand column is for. And then you're going to state something of empathy. It's a you statement. You're going to say, you have been under a lot of stress. You're going to make you statements about what they are undergoing. And I highly recommend you look this book up, maybe use ChatGPT, use some web references to think about how to integrate this into conversation, because we're not going to take the time to do it here. And again, we need to make sure that they embody this and integrate this into their way of thinking in the conversation. There's no reference, this is not sympathy, and there's no reference here to your own feelings. It's just a reference to their feelings and what they are going through. And then we can deliver the truth payload once they have fully integrated the support and the empathy, and it's genuine and they sense that. Now we're ready to get to the truth that you need to tell them, which may be a hard pill to swallow. You say, a problem exists. I can't have you raising your voice at me every time we have a conversation. Maybe that's the thing you say. I need you to stop running over the neighbor's cat. I don't know, whatever the thing is you need to say. Once they feel supported, once they understand that you have empathy, now we can get to the truth payload. But you know as well as I do, this is not how the conversations go. What do we do first? We come in headstrong, leading with the truth statement. Bam! Stop running over the neighbor's cat. Okay? And what does that do? They're not ready to talk about that yet. Their emotional state is not matched yet. So we have to dwell with them according to wisdom, dwell with them according to knowledge, as Peter says. Understand, and I'm talking about both ways. Let's go for men or women in either direction. Yeah, there we go. Did something weird with my mouse there. So we come in, we're just thinking of the truth statement that we need to lay on them. And when we do that, it winds up being communicatively dysfunctional, because we have to understand that they are embodied and their body wants certain things and needs certain things. And we'll talk about male and female communication in just a second, masculine and feminine communication in just a second too, which is very important to understand for this as well. So if this element is not missing, or if it's missing, or if it's not embodied. So if the support statement is missing, you will be accused of not caring or not wanting to be involved. And this accusation suggests the support statement has been skipped or has not been embodied or integrated into their way of thinking. What about the empathy statement? You will be, if you don't properly show empathy in a way that they integrate, you will be accused of, you don't know how I feel, or you don't understand. This accusation suggests the support statement, actually the empathy statement, has been skipped or has not been embodied. Now, what happens if you successfully get the support integrated and you successfully deliver the empathy and it is integrated, but you fail to properly land the truth? That is also a big problem. There's a lot of marriages that exist right here, okay? And what happens with the person is they think their own perceptions, while they're angry and upset, they think that they're universally shared and supported by everybody. The problem is the relationship cannot sustain the weight of the unrealistic expectations that are emotionally driven. And then they become emotionally entangled with others, and others become enmeshed in the delusion. Now you find yourself enabling a person in their delusional way of seeing things. I should be able to run over the neighbor's cat whenever I want to. It's not my fault. No, you probably shouldn't run over the neighbor's cat. All right. So now you're Yeah, they shouldn't have had their cat outside. You don't have to watch where you're going when you drive. It's their job to keep you find yourself joining in on the delusion. Okay? And this isn't good for anybody. That cannot be sustained for very long. Okay? Because now one of you is fake. And the problem now, one person thinks all is well. Oh, I thought we were okay. I thought everything was better. Well, the person's playing along with your delusion. They do not feel safe, or they failed in some way to deliver the truth payload to you. It's not okay. It's not all right. You're not on the track to getting better, but they are trying to diffuse the emotional outburst of the anger and don't know how to do it. And they may have their own, we talk about trauma responses, but they might be in fawn mode because of the anger responses. And now they're giving in to your delusional version of the truth because their trauma response is in fawn mode. Freeze, the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, the 4F response from the limbic system. And so then they fail to deliver the truth payload, and then the psychosis of because when we're angry, we don't see things clearly. And when we're perpetually angry and perpetually don't see things clearly, we start to develop a long-term chronic psychosis, delusional way of seeing things. And the people around us who are too afraid to bring us the truth payloads or are unable to do so successfully, they start enabling our delusion that is emotionally driven, especially when it's chronic. And then we have all kinds of problems going on. So you want to make sure this is done fully and completely with all 3 steps done integrated completely. When you find yourself, when it seems like the other person wants their emotion matched and the informational payload doesn't seem as important to them as it does to you, which brings up the concept of masculine versus feminine communication. Again, these are not gender specific. Okay. Either one of these can come from either the male or the female. So this is not necessarily gender bound because feminine energy can come from a man and masculine energy can come from a woman. Masculine communication uses words to deliver a payload of semantic logic. Feminine communication uses words to deliver an emotional payload, something like poetry, if you will, is an example of that, which is very often much more important for effective communication than the logic or semantic meaning of the words employed. In other words, if the man can read between the lines for what is being emotionally conveyed, that signal might be more of a authentic signal, a helpful signal, than the words being used. You got to make the judgment call on that, though. There's no formula for this, okay? Now, this can be very confusing for a person who views language strictly as a carrier of semantic or logical information, which is what a lot of men do. And this is one of the problems with systematic theology, is that we think that everything can be reduced in this way, and we do not realize that, like, the Bible has a lot of feminine language in it. El Shaddai, one of the names of God, means multi-breasted nurturing mother. Okay, there are feminine attributes to God. I didn't make that up. I didn't write that. Don't get mad at me. But there is a lot of feminine language in the Bible. So, in other words, so we can't just systematize what our partner is saying down to its semantic, logical content. There's something else going on in their body, and the psychotechnology of language does not always match the experience that's happening in the body. Sometimes they are very much mismatched, and it takes wisdom, time, and experience to learn how to mediate that difference and try to close that gap as best as we can. Now, this does not mean that women should expect men to be able to meet them where they are and become mind readers. That's not possible, nor should men try to engineer a partner that stops using words to deliver emotional payloads. Knowledge of these tendencies should help all parties involved to both send high-quality signals to their partner and be able to better interpret what a real issue might be that's under discussion. We don't want to train each other to use emotional dysregulation to get what you want. If a person does not exhibit the desired behavior until you become emotionally dysregulated, they are inadvertently training you to be an angry person. And so if you're trying to get your husband to stop running over the neighbor's cat, maybe stop trying to run over the neighbor's cat. You're calm, you're cool, collected, but he he keeps trying to run over the neighbor's cat. And I'm just using this silly example. But then one day you just lose your cool. Stop running over the neighbor's cat. And you start throwing pots and pans. And now he stops running over the neighbor's cat. Well, if that's the only effective way to communicate with the person, what they are doing is training you to be an angry person, because otherwise they're not going to get the message. And you don't want to become that person. You might want to ask yourself some questions like this. Do you like the other person? And do you like yourself when you are with that person? If the answer to either one of those is no, especially if you're still in the selection process, partner selection process, you might want to take that person off the list. If you've already through the selection process and the answer to one of these is no, then we're going to both need to do some work to get these back to yeses. And some of that work is what we're talking about in this video. So we do not want to reward emotional dysregulation. If a person acts in an undesirable way and you respond by giving them what they want and what they're asking for, you are rewarding that kind of behavior and you will get more of it. If your spouse is trying to get something from you and they are inappropriately manipulative in order to get it, and that's what gets them what they want, if you reward that with giving in, they're going to keep doing that to you. So we don't want to reward emotionally dysregulated behavior or manipulative behavior or anything like that. We want to stop it and get the communication on track before we start acquiescing to what people are asking for. Women are incubators by nature. They will take a small dose of what is given to them and they will multiply it and send it back. This is very important for men to know. If you give them a small dose of semen, for example, they will give you a baby in 9 months. In the same vein, if you give them a small dose of frustration, they will return back to you a harvest of aggravation and anger. It'll ramp it up. There's an old saying people used to say, you always reap what you sow, and you always reap more than what you sow. Okay? This is the case with any feminine energy from either partner, and it's not necessarily gender specific. So be very careful what you are sowing into your partner, because it's going to come back multiple-fold, exponentially. The Bible has an interesting passage that says, a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. Now, this isn't the only interactive advice in the Bible. There's some strange interactive advice, such as Proverbs chapter 26, verse 4 through 5. But this is one of them. It says, the tongue of the wise useth knowledge aright, but the mouth of fools poureth out foolishness. Well, when we're talking about a soft answer turning away wrath, maybe something like the SET method of communication, something like that. Not just giving in, not just fawning. Okay? You don't want to just, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. We don't want to just fawn in a trauma response to somebody who's actually being manipulative to get them to calm down and like you again. Okay? We actually want to deal with the problem, but not in a way that escalates the emotional dysregulation. So when you do feel emotional dysregulation, when you do feel angry or frustrated, this is your clue that you have something to work on in one of these areas. Now, there could be other areas too, but these are examples of areas where you may need to do some work. As soon as you want to raise your voice in frustration or anger, that is your body signaling to you that you have a deficit in one of these areas. So you could be having a 4F response in your limbic system here. And your limbic system is active, your prefrontal cortex, where all your good thinking takes place, and your problem-solving skills is pretty much inactive. You're basically a talking monkey when you are 4F activated. Okay? And that's not necessarily bad, especially if the threat is real. And you might be going into 4F response not because of a real threat that's happening to you immediately, but because it reminds you of chronic trauma that you've had from the past, maybe from parents or something else. That is something we're going to have to deal with in another video. But if you find yourself constantly going into one of these 4F responses when you're in a conversation with your spouse who's supposed to be your loving partner, you might have some chronic trauma issues to deal with, and we're going to do a separate video on that. The other thing, you might be having something that's called transference. Okay, transference. I'm going to give, and then I'll talk about transference and projection in a minute at the same time. So transference, let's say a person's talking in this, you can just get this off the internet. These two images come right off the internet. Let's say a person is talking to, this person in the middle on the left is talking to their therapist, and their parent figure used to laugh at other people's feelings. And so this person will transfer this to their therapist, and they say, well, my therapist will laugh at my feelings. So they will transfer a behavior or the catalyst of an emotional state of being that used to occur from, say, a parent figure in the past to the person that they're with now. And this very often happens with a person's current spouse. A wife might treat their husband like they were always as if their husband is the same as their dad, as if their husband carries all the negative traits that traumatized them when they were a kid, or either way. So that's transference, when you are associating a negative emotional state that was prompted by some person from your past, and you are overlaying that on top of the person your interlocutor now, your current partner. We want to notice that and avoid that. And then projection is when there's something inside yourself that you haven't admitted to yourself yet that you are blaming on the other person that you're with. For example, in this diagram here, the person on the left, on the right diagram here, on the left side of the right side of the diagram, she's saying, I don't admit it, but I'm bitter. So she's bitter but hasn't admitted that she's bitter. And then she's saying, my therapist is very bitter. So that's who she's talking to. Well, if she's talking to her husband, she might say, my husband is very bitter. And really, she's the one that's bitter. So projection is when you have implicit conditions that are inside you, and you project them onto other people, and you accuse them of all the things that you deep down are actually afraid of being accused of yourself and are afraid to deal with yourself. These people are very quick to villainize other people even if they don't know them that well, and they will take a small trigger example of one little thing to offload everything they don't like about themselves into this other person. That actually happened to me just a couple of weeks ago. And so that kind of thing happens. So back to our little chart here, it could be when you find yourself responding to your partner negatively or wanting to, could be a transference issue, could be projection, could be your vagus nerve. I recommend that you study polyvagal theory, and each one of these is a domain of inquiry that needs to be studied out thoroughly. Okay? Could be your vagus nerve acting up. You ever get butterflies on your stomach? Your vagus nerve is attached to your limbic system. It goes all the way down through your thoracic cavity, all the way down into your abdomen. And we feel certain ways in our chest and in our stomach. If you're really sad, you notice your chest hurts. It hurts. That's your vagus nerve acting up. You have strong emotions. Before you go on, say you going to a recital and you're about to play the violin in front of thousands of people, you might feel your stomach is feeling queasy. That is your vagus nerve that is involved with some of that. You'll also find that your vagus nerve is involved in group dynamics, and the people, they've done studies and they found that the people who can control and regulate their vagus nerve responses the most effectively tend to arise to be able to lead new groups in group dynamics more efficiently and more effectively. And there's different techniques you can do. Once you feel yourself getting defensive, there's breathing, there's things you can do. You can breathe deep breaths, and if you hum through your nose while you breathe, of course you probably don't want to do that in public, but if you're by yourself, there's different things you can do that actually help. Awareness combined with some exercises can get you calmed back down. You can't be defensive and open at the same time. I said this to somebody one time, and they were like 20 at the time. And of course their response was, well, I can. I'm different than everybody else. No, you can't be defensive and open at the same time. So if you're dealing with your spouse, you probably want to be in an open state, not defensive. So if you feel yourself getting defensive, that's where it's important to know something about the limbic system and the vagus nerve. study some polyvagal theory, and learn some exercise to get yourself back into an open state, because you can't be defensive and open at the same time. So you need to work on getting open when you're dealing with a loving partner. You might find that you have tension in your body from unemoted chronic trauma. If you have chronic trauma from the past and you've been storing it up in your body somewhere because you refuse to feel it, you can't, I know this may sound cheesy, but you can't heal it till you feel it. It has to be processed. It has to be felt. Oftentimes, grief can be very cathartic because it's very necessary to feel the things that we don't want to feel in order to become healed from these things. And then we have our emotional identity attachments down here. I have this diagram of a person as if they have tentacles coming out of them and they are attached to all these things. Okay? Like tentacles, we extend our emotional attachment into our job, social circle, hobbies, relationship, accomplishments, achievements, belief system, knowledge, being right, group affiliations, skills, belongings, music, reputation, preferences, politics, nationality, debates, sports teams, etc. These emotional attachments constitute our identity. It's what we refer to when we say the word ego. We think these things are enriching, but it's only in the reeling in of these emotional attachments that we reel in the line, reel in the tentacle, letting go of the emotional attachments. And in the emotional and identity divestiture from all these things around which these tentacles are wrapped, that we can be in the richness of the authentic self. So when you're in a discussion with your significant other and you find something going awry, it could be any one of these things, And in this video specifically, we're kind of focusing on ego work, egoic identity attachments, when you feel something in your ego get pricked in just a way. I was talking to Paula the other night and we were having a discussion, and I told her that her word usage kind of stung my ego a little bit. I was able to say that. She knew exactly what I was going through. No need for yelling, fussing, fighting, disagreeing. And then we talked about it like calm, rational adults, and it was wonderful and fine. Something to bear in mind: anger reactions build resentment. They lead to contempt. Behavioral studies show that either 4 out of 5, really it's 8 out of 11, interactions need to be positive with your significant other in order for the relationship to persist and be happy. We'll do another video on what constitutes failure in a relationship, and being together isn't the only measure of success. Being together and miserable is failure. And sometimes a relationship can end and not be a failure. We'll talk about that in a different video. But this ratio here, there needs to be, so about 8 out of 11 interactions need to be positive. But there also needs to be a healthy level of contending, or the relationship will start to feel fake. Well, I disagree with this, and I want to push back a little. There might be some conversations like that. They don't have to be nasty. They don't have to be mean. You don't have to be throwing things at each other, or stomping on each other's belongings, or you don't have to do any of that. You can actually have contending conversations that can even be fun, but still there's a little contending, a little pushback going on, which is fine. Eye rolling, interestingly, as pointed out by Jordan Peterson, has been identified as the best interactive predictor that a relationship cannot be salvaged. Over time, most of your partner's regret, resentment memories will be wearing your face. Because if you're with somebody and you're there all the time, whenever they regret or resent something, you probably were there, maybe the cause of a lot of it. So avoiding adding memories to that bank. Avoid adding memories to that bank if possible. You don't want to just be willy-nilly throwing things into your wife's resentment box. It'll be wearing your face, and every time they come up, she'll think about how she resents that and remembers how you may have been involved in producing that resentment-causing event. So you don't want to add to that if you can. So don't have anger reactions. Just don't have them to the degree that you can. And when you have a conversation, these are some things that will help in a conversation. Clearly identify and be able to state the purpose of a conversation, especially if it's a conversation addressing something that needs to be addressed. Okay? Conversations that are addressing disagreeable behaviors or something you want to change, they need to be short, and they need to reach an understanding and a resolution quickly. Don't drag it out. Work one issue at a time. Avoid tit-for-tat accusations. Avoid pointing out hypocrisies and performative contradictions. Like, stop running over the neighbor's cat. Well, I saw you trying to run over the other neighbor's dog. Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute, but right now let's talk about not running over the neighbor's cat. You see, separate those issues. Don't let things build up and get out of hand and jump from one issue to the other. Stick with one issue and then maybe take a break. Separate those issues into separate follow-on conversations, which may need to be tabled until both parties are emotionally ready. Like, okay, we're finished talking about not running over the neighbor's cat. Let's talk about not running over the neighbor's dog tomorrow afternoon. Something like that. Not trying to avoid it, because when you know you've reached your limit and you can't stay calm anymore, or the level of emotion has turned you both into talking monkeys and nothing's being solved, it's okay to take a break. Now, don't be one of those people that's being accused of trying to avoid taking responsibility. Oh, you just don't want to have this discussion because you don't want to take responsibility for what you did. Okay, don't accuse your partner of that when they acknowledge that, hey, I've reached my emotional limit. While I can stay emotionally regulated, I need to take a break from this conversation so we can maintain our calm and come back later with a clearer head. That's okay. Let that happen. Don't be accusatory with that kind of thing. You may be able to tell I spent many years being accused of that kind of thing. I would reach my emotional limit. I'm like, I need to take a break from this. And I was accused of not wanting to stay and deal with the issue, which wasn't the issue at all. So you may find yourself in that situation. So following everything that we've talked about in this video, okay, the benefits would be that you relate better to people that you're relating to, your spouse, your kids, whoever it is, your friends. You get to know yourself better, because we really don't know ourselves as much as we think we do. We're on autopilot from a lot of different stimuli in our lives, some going all the way back to our childhood, and we don't even know it. We have a really high estimation of how in control we are. We really aren't. So you get to know yourself better. You start to actually take more control of yourself. You start to actually be able to get in control. I should probably list that up here. And then you become actively engaged in your own growth. You become more authentic. You have an increased interactive fluency. What's a better way to interact with people that results in getting accomplishing more things more effectively and efficiently? You increase your own emotional intelligence, and you increase the capacity to cultivate meaning in relationship if you follow these things. So I highly recommend that you do these. I'm hoping that soon some of you will write back to me and state that, hey, I tried these things and I followed Dr. Caroline Leaf's 63-day program, and this is a lot better now than it was. If you want to talk to me, if you want to have a one-on-one session with me, we offer paid one-on-one consultations. At the website, go to the homepage and scroll down to book a one-on-one consultation, and we will take any of the things we've discovered and built fluency in on this channel and apply it to your situation. And I also try to give these a lot of forethought and a lot of afterthought and a lot of after feedback. So it's not just the 1 hour. You actually get a lot of useful information that you can use. One person that I was just talking to, I had several sessions with somebody between, mainly this month, and they wanted me to include in this little pitch here that the one-on-one session that they had was sessions that they had with me were very, very beneficial, and they highly recommend them. Okay, and that's the feedback that we've been getting. But one person was insistent that this gets included, but of course those are anonymous, so we're not going to be saying anybody's names or anything like that. And that concludes the session for today. Thanks for watching. May the Lord bless you, and good day.